Mr. President, distinguished delegates, colleagues, for 79 years now, our countries have met in this chamber in order to speak their own truth, to exchange best practices, and to support important initiatives. And we do this with the motto of making the world a better place. But is the world becoming a better place? Is it more predictable, safer? Is it more stable? There are some veterans in the room who probably remember the time when the UN did have a special role to play. Us less seasoned participants only heard about this or read about this in textbooks. Back then, many years ago, the UN Chamber, or the UN Charter, was something unshakable, a true guarantor of compromise, forward-looking solutions. We remember the horrors of World War II. No one wants a repetition of that tragedy. That's why we created a singular instrument for collective dispute settlement and for strengthening the architecture of international cooperation. Indeed, history has shown us that the instrument we came up with is not perfect. Just like we're not perfect, but without a doubt, it's the best we have, and the best we had back then, the best we have now. Not all issues which were decided on equivocally were implemented, and blood continues to spill as a result. For instance, Palestine. What's unfolded there is a true humanitarian catastrophe, and tens of thousands of civilians continue to die. But this does not diminish the achievements of the past century. We shattered the colonial system. Many people finally got the right to develop themselves. And new hubs, economic, industrial, and financial, appeared across all continents. Entire regions came out of the shadows of hunger and epidemics. The UN's peacekeeping activities helped to prevent bloody conflicts or to put an end to them. UN Blue could be seen everywhere where development problems were being resolved. But what's happening now? Why did we have to establish a group of friends in defense of the UN Charter? Why today are we compelled to defend this document, the Charter, which should be of overriding legal importance for all of us? Why can we not use the entire UN toolkit to put the world in order? The answer is patently obvious, because a number of countries do not abide by the norms enshrined in the Charter, nor do they want to, because for them, abiding by international law is equivalent to slowly being extinguished. Of course, when they speak from this rostrum, they do recall the Charter, but not universally so, but only to serve their egotistical interests and claims, and often they claim that others are flouting the Charter. Let me remind you, the UN law is universal. It gives everyone equal rights to develop and the rights to various benefits and technologies and resources on a non-discriminatory basis. Is this approach acceptable to the West? Clearly, no. What they're interested in is maintaining their dominance and the prosperity of their elites. In order to achieve this, they're exploiting entire nations and the resources of others, holding the rest of the world back. They're employing that principle, which is as old as the world itself, divide and conquer. It's one of the roots of many of modernity's conflicts. All of the UN's principles are being put at the bottom of the pile in the interests of the vital interests of the US and their closest satellites. But if a state dares to enact their own policy to protect their people, if they try to throw off the yoke of external control over their resources, the West all of a sudden remembers all of these conventions, these paragraphs, and even the tiniest references at the bottom of them. And what's most important, anyone who disagrees with the West will be subjected to illegal sanctions and pressure. This is what's behind all of the so-called color revolutions. They resulted in suffering and upheaval for ordinary people. That's the way of the West. That's their recipe for a new world. And this recipe is generously seasoned with NATO weapons. Just think about it. Today, roughly 40 countries with a population of 2.5 billion are under illegal, unilateral, restrictive measures imposed by the US and the EU. And many people have been living under such conditions for decades, whereas peace-loving Cuba has been in this situation for over half a century. This instrument is a one that flagrantly violates entire sections of the UN Charter and international law. It scuppers sustainable development, undermines food and energy security, restricts access to world markets, and violates the right to the freedom of movement. It also has a boomerang effect on the countries who impose these measures. We're seeing in neighboring EU countries people complain about ever higher prices on food prices, energy prices, as well as concomitant social upheavals. What do we have as a result? From the point of view of the collective West, and here I have some information taken from US sources, 72% of the world's people live in what the West calls autocracies. 20 years ago, this figure stood at 46%, again, according to their data. So has the West managed to force humanity to live according to their templates? Clearly, no. We see a clear trend. Free countries in the global South who do not accept sanctions will see others meddle in their domestic affairs, and so-called democratization will be foisted upon them. They want to develop on the basis of their own social traditions, their vision of the world, to protect their people. And today we have a global majority within which new ideas and new projects are springing up. They're strictly peaceful. They're in the interests of the entire global community, and they do not seek to restrict anyone's interests. The Chinese initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative, put forward by Xi Jinping, the initiative on global security and global civilization, the Russian and Belarusian initiative of Charter, of multipolarity and diversity in the 21st century, the Indian Voice of the Global South initiative, and many others. All of these projects are geared toward establishing a unified international community in which the fate of all of the people of our planet is united, not just the fate of the golden billion. The planet united in all of its diversity. It enriches all of us. This is the way forward. This is the way chosen for the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, for our people. It's underpinned by respect, trust, sincerity, reliance, and responsibility. And in fact, when a new package of illegal sanctions was imposed on Belarus, we responded with openness and transparency, unilaterally waiving visas for EU citizens. Thousands of Europeans have used this right coming to Belarus, and they were not disappointed. If we placed more trust in the UN, most peace-loving initiatives would be born and would grow within the organization, not outside it. At the same time, the world would not be threatened by fragmentation into political and economic blocs. A few words about the conflict potential of our planet. It might be somewhat unusual what I'm about to say. We're all used to third-rate series and YouTube videos. We're being taught to receive information in this simplistic way, forcing us to forget the truths which many humanists and great authors penned in the past. Therefore, I'd like to cite three Western authors, and I'd like to draw parallels with what's going on right now. A quote from Kings and Cabbages, O. Henry. The little opera bouffe nations play at government and intrigue until someday a big silent gunboat glides into the offing and warns them not to. An American ship. Next example, Graham Greene, The Quiet American. Written not that long ago. A CIA undercover operative working as a staffer at the US Embassy in Vietnam sought to enact terrorist acts so as to achieve a coup d'etat in that state, in Vietnam, and install a government loyal to the US. And last but not least, Kurt Vonnegut. Roughly 50 years ago, he wrote this, A Man Without a Country. He did not understand why the US and the UK, at the very end of World War II, when everything was already over, why they had to carpet bomb Dresden, razing it to the ground and burying in the rubble, under the rubble, roughly, in fact, several 100,000 people, children, women, and the elderly. We know why they did this, to make them fear the future. And this is very similar to what we're seeing these days. Meddling provocations. However, we now see real American warships, and not just one, but many. This is why we need a strong and impartial universal international organization which can guarantee that a balance is struck in our world, in which no one country or group of countries can do as it sees fits imposing its will on the UN to stoke its egotism at the expense of the global majority. A strong organization wouldn't allow transnational capital to benefit the collective West. It wouldn't allow for Ukraine to fight to the last Ukrainian. And if everyone, like Belarus today, understood what's actually happening in the conflict zone, what risks we're running, then we'd want to put an end to this bloody confrontation between these two brotherly nations. Long ago, Ukraine and Russia would be sitting around the negotiating table, not out in the battlefield. There are many timely initiatives, such as the Brazil-China peace plan, and yet without Russia's participation, they won't be successful. A new security architecture in our region is also impossible without Belarus's participation. NATO is bolstering military capabilities at our borders many times over. Tens of thousands of soldiers, thousands of units of military equipment, and we're seriously disquieted by the fact that these games might get out of control, resulting in the conflict spreading throughout the region and throughout the world, which would have catastrophic repercussions for us all. Europe has its share of nuclear weapons. Thus, escalating these tensions is a path straight to World War III. 10 years ago, in Minsk, fruitful agreements were penned so as to resolve the conflict in Ukraine. Today, we continue to propose our efforts as we understand Russians and Ukrainians best of all, and we're doing everything we can to achieve peace in long-suffering Ukraine. We're very much interested in this, more than anyone. And just for your general edification, since the start of the conflict, over 250,000 Ukrainians crossed the border into Belarus. Over the last few months, 12 to 15,000 a year have been entering Belarus. These are official figures. So we're seeing people running away from prosperous Europe. And in fact, these figures are much greater than the number of refugees who have gone to the EU across our border. Shameless efforts are being made to push migrants into Belarus. This is a dirty page in the book of European democracy. On our border with the EU, soldiers from certain EU countries are beating and torturing refugees from Asia, Africa, and the Middle East with impunities. Dozens have died. This has been reported by independent sources. Some have been buried without identification. In fact, the Council of Europe recently condemned such actions and criticized a new Polish law which broadens the legal scope for Polish soldiers using firearms against refugees. This is what so-called enlightened Europe is doing to welcome those fleeing the horrors which resulted from the policies of intervention of the collective West, intervention in the sovereign affairs of other countries. These actions are a flagrant violation of the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees. All of the facts have been recorded and will be sent to the relevant bodies for investigation, although these bodies should have started investigating them of their own accord long ago. That's why we're concerned. We're concerned by how we see the path towards strengthening the UN. First, the UN should throw off the diktat of a number of states who are doing as they see fit, feeling themselves to be exceptional. The UN is all of us. Secretariat staff should remember that when they become secretariat staff, they should serve the interests of the organization as a whole, not of their fellow nationals. They should be objective, impartial, and independent. Second, the organization should support regional processes, because regionalism is a key reality in today's times. We constantly see regional integration bodies going from strength to strength, and this across the world. We're seeing the global majority, regional projects rising, BRICS, SCO, CIS, the Eurasian Economic Union, the African Union, ASEAN, many others. I talked about this earlier. The UN must align itself with these processes, helping them to interlock and develop. Third, last year, Western countries waged a dirty campaign to prevent Belarus being elected to serve on the Security Council. That's what we saw, that they fear our honest voice being represented on the Security Council. However, we'll continue speaking openly and directly about a whole host of global issues. We'll continue insisting that Security Council reform is enacted and that this reform is fair, because the voice of the Global South on the Security Council, it's our voice. This is why we believe what's necessary is Security Council reform by including developing countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. These countries are at the heart of global problems. They know better than anyone else how to resolve wars and conflicts in the developing world. Their weight in global affairs is much greater than it was 80 years ago as well. Fourth, the UN should adopt a principled stance regarding the unacceptability of unilateral measures. We should expect the organization to take serious and objective measures to assess the negative impact of sanctions on sustainable development. What's more is the UN's work to counter illicit sanctions should be systematic. A principled objective assessment of all instances of their use needs to be given. Fifth, we need to use the UN as a platform for effectively resolving growing transboundary threats. Belarus has always been in favor of a collective approach to these global problems, such as migration, pandemics, natural disasters, human trafficking. The list goes on. Outside this chamber, there is a counter, which shows how much is being spent on arms in real time. Trillions of dollars. And that's only the money that the UN knows about. We think the golden billion countries should use these trillions of dollars not to fuel yet more wars and conflicts, but to resolve vital problems. Many global problems would be resolved in a flash. The UN would get the resources to help development, which it currently lacks. It keeps saying that donors don't have the money, they're not giving the money. And at the same time, those who have self-styled themselves as hegemons will shoulder their responsibility to solve global problems. What's more is the UN should be the voice of states, without this voice being diluted by non-government bodies. After all, member states are the ones taking decisions. They're the ones responsible for the destiny of millions of people on our planet and are responsible for implementing all of their decisions. President, today is a special this year is a special year for the Republic of Belarus. Recently, we marked the 80th anniversary of our liberation from the Nazis. This marks the start of a new chapter in our history. We stand proud that we created a people-centered state where people are at the core of our national policies. Next year, we'll mark the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. We'll do this together. How will the world approach this milestone? Will it be entangled in disagreements and conflicts? This is why the President of the Republic of Belarus, Mr. Lukashenko, put forward the initiative of a global dialogue on security, and it very much dovetails with the proposals put forward by many delegates from this rostrum today. We will continue knocking on the doors of peace and constructive action, the doors of security and development. Starting last year, we began holding an international conference on Eurasian security in Minsk, the goal being to consolidate political, economic, and other processes in Greater Eurasia for the benefit of our states and people. This year, it will be held on the 31st of October. We invite all of you to attend. We must breathe the spirit of San Francisco into the UN's lungs. After all, that is the spirit that gave life to our organization. We stand convinced that this is absolutely necessary right now. It's necessary to secure the interests of all people on our planet. I thank you for your kind attention.